This is Judaism Unbound, episode 72, The Power of Popular Culture. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofus.
And our guest today on Judaism Unbound is Randi Zuckerberg. She is one of the leading voices in the world of technology and also popular culture. She has been ranked among the 50 digital power players by The Hollywood Reporter. She worked for about 7 years at Facebook as director of market development and spokesperson. And after leaving Facebook, she founded Zuckerberg Media, which we'll talk about on the show. She is also the author of a book called Dot Complicated and a children's book called Dot. She is the executive producer of a children's television show called Dot on the Sprout Network. And she is also the host of her own show on Sirius XM Radio. What you may not know about Randi Zuckerberg is that she also has substantial involvement in some innovative Jewish projects, including having been on the founding team of Hello Mazel, which we talked about a number of months ago in our episode where we talked to the folks from The Kitchen. We're really excited to have Randi Zuckerberg with us today, talking about the way in which the changes brought about by our digital world might and should impact Judaism. So, Randi Zuckerberg, thank you so much for joining us on Judaism Unbound. It's a real thrill to have you.
Thank you. It's a thrill to be here chatting with you guys.
I think that a lot of our listeners are familiar with Facebook, but it would be great to tell us a little bit about what Zuckerberg Media is all about and what you're doing these days.
I had an incredible time working at Facebook, advising, investing in startups. But I have to say, my relationship with Silicon Valley was always a complicated one because on one hand, I loved what I was doing. I loved being in the most innovative city, working with the smartest, brightest people on the planet. But on the other hand, I was pretty much the only woman in the room for 10 years. And that was confusing. I often felt confused. You know, I'm in this city that's so innovative, but is it only one type of person that gets to decide what's innovative? And that really left me with a very complicated set of emotions around my time working in tech in Silicon Valley. And I ultimately decided, here I was traveling the world, telling women that they needed to start their own companies so that we could have more women in tech and business, but I wasn't walking the walk. And a few years ago, I decided that it was time for me to branch out on my own, to be one of those women entrepreneurs that I was encouraging everyone else to be, and to start creating that value. So with Zuckerberg Media, our mission is to put tech-savvy, smart, entrepreneurial women and girls into pop culture. And we're doing that through books, television, live events, all kinds of mediums that you would reach people.
I was reading your book, Dot Complicated, and I was thinking about the idea of figuring out how to be a good parent as this challenge that a lot of us face at a certain point where, you know, no matter what you've done, whatever startup you've started, and no matter what else you might have done in your life, most of us have a sense that we don't know what we're doing. And that feels to me like an example of an unmet need in human life in the 21st century, right? That I think that most of us don't have a wisdom tradition that's readily accessible to us that helps us know how to be a good parent.
It's funny, I've been brainstorming this a lot, and I think that when you look back in history at almost any culture, when they give you too much of a gap between, you know, big events or opting in, people drift away at anything. I think we are very guilty of that. In Judaism, I think people naturally kind of opt back in when they have children, like you were saying, because suddenly they think, oh, I'm responsible for another human being. They start to think about their values, their identity. And that's when you're able to bring a lot of people back into the fold. For me, the gap that I'm most worried about is the gap between the bar mitzvah and having children, because that is a really long gap and it's getting longer and longer. You know, in our society now that people are waiting longer to have children, that's a 20 plus year gap that we're letting people opt out because we're not putting really any big events in there. So I'm wondering if, you know, there's even disruption by, moving the age of the bar mitzvah, or, you know, having another big ceremony at some point in your early 20s, or, you know, just giving people a reason to not fall away for 20 years.
I've actually spent a lot of time myself thinking about that. When I turned 26, I threw myself, I didn't invite anyone. It was sort of an internal Lex moment. But I had a bar 26 that I made for myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And over the course of the year leading up to that, I sort of just put in some thinking about like, what Jewishly have I not done that I might want to try? What are some new ideas that I could explore? And I did things like built a sukkah for the first time. And it was just like a cool experience, because I just deeply agree with you that we have a massive gap between that age of 13 and when most American Jews certainly are having children. And it's something for us to think about and consider how we would eliminate that. One idea that we've been playing around with on the podcast is this sense that more than the internet simply being a new tool that we all use, which I think everyone's aware of how that's been a major game changer. I've actually, and Dan and I have both been talking about the internet perhaps as like a new location where Jewish life and all forms of life are happening. Like it's almost as if we're sort of migrating in certain senses into a digital world. And since I know you've done a lot of thinking about it, I'm curious just to hear, what are some of the most exciting positive elements of that pseudo migration, and what also are some of the dangers of that migration?
You really hit on something, because, I mean, since the destruction of the temple thousands of years ago, we've been very adaptive as a religion to being able to bring Judaism into our own homes and being able to bring it everywhere. And so it seems like a very natural progression that as we're living our lives more and more online, that we would be able to find a way to bring Jewish cultures and customs into our digital homes as well. I think in some ways, I mean, you should see our home on Shabbat. We do Shabbat every Friday night with our children, and we usually have 3 phones going because we're FaceTiming in my parents in California, my husband's parents in Florida. Like we have, 3 Skypes or FaceTimes that are going so that everyone can be doing Shabbat together. And so I think that's one of the incredible things about technology is that it allows us to, all of a sudden now connect. I can do Shabbat with my parents in California every single week. It's incredible. At the same time, I think, all the things we love about technology are also the things that are the most challenging about it. It's easy to envision a world where we replace showing up in person because it's easier to participate through a screen. And I think we definitely lose a lot of that value and that human connection and that community when we are only doing things through screens.
It's interesting when you went there for Shabbat, it's actually refreshing, because I think that a lot of times when people nowadays are talking about a new way of thinking about Shabbat, that it's often talked about as a digital Sabbath, right? We should put away our technology. But what you're talking about is using technology to enhance Shabbat in this case.
I love that you're saying this, because in our home, we were doing, a full digital Sabbath. We were doing all these things. And I turned to my husband and I was like, I'm going to be honest with you. Shabbat feels like a punishment. Like there's a lot of things that I like to do on my phone. I like to be up on the news, things like that. And I was like, it feels to me like I dread Saturday, because like all we're doing is saying things that we can't have and can't do. And we were like, how can we make Shabbat the most awesome day of the week? So now we have a new rule in our house where we don't eat any junk food except on Shabbat. The second it turns to Shabbat, my kids, they can eat cake for 24 straight hours if they want. Like they can have ice cream for breakfast and cake, and then as soon as it's not Shabbat, we're back to broccoli. Like, now all of a sudden our mindset has totally shifted from like a deprivation day to like the most awesome day of the week.
I'm fascinated by the 24/7 cake manifesto for Shabbat. I think that is fantastic.
We do, we have like the typical prayers that we do on Shabbat, and then we end with the yum yum prayer. And the yum yum prayer is what kicks off our 24 hours of gluttony, and it's amazing. And like, I now have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old who like talk about Shabbat all week and plan what they're going to eat, and like are so excited for it.
Yeah, and when I hear that, my first instinct when I hear that is everybody should do this. Like, this sounds awesome. I want the Jewish universe to like create a new Talmud where that's what people do for Shabbat. Like, that'd be great. But then I take a step back and I'm like, well, wait a second. Part of what's actually special about that, at least from my perspective, is the fact that your family came up with it. and owns it, and it's yours. And I'm
Totally.
just thinking that brings up a big question, right? Because I think we've been used to a Judaism for a very, very long time that's built on sharedness, that's built on really everybody, at least the idea in theory of everybody doing a shared set of rituals, sharing a set of holidays. But what you've done is you've come up with something that is unique to you, but that is still clearly anchored in Judaism. You're doing it on Friday night through Saturday, not on some other day of the week. There's clear connections to texts that even say in ancient Jewish lore that you should differentiate somehow between Shabbat and the rest of the week. So I guess I'm just curious. All that is to say, like, what do we do with the balance between amazing experiments that you and families like you are putting together and also trying to create like a unified whole of Judaism where we share some of those things?
It is. I mean, it's difficult because I also have to say, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I found myself in Poland on Yom Kippur. I was giving a talk at a tech conference, and then I decided to stay for a few days. And it was incredible to be able to walk into a synagogue in Poland. And even though I didn't understand any of the language they were saying between the prayers, like I knew every melody and every prayer. And that was incredible to be able to walk into a foreign country and have that shared communal experience. But at the same time, you're right. We also live in a world where, especially millennials, they value being unique. They don't want to have every single experience just like everyone else. And so I think there has to be a happy medium between feeling like you're doing things that are unique and special. I mean, you even see that with bar mitzvahs now. I feel like, every bar mitzvah I went to used to be exactly the same. And now more and more people are trying to differentiate and be different and have unique elements. So I think you're right. I think we have to decide, what are the core tenets of Judaism? And then where is there some flexibility? Because I think providing that flexibility makes it much more exciting and opens it up to a lot more people who, would love to do something creative on a Shabbat time.
Connected to that, I wanted to get your take on something that Lex and I have been also playing around with in our conversations, which is what we've called the chutzpah versus knowledge curve, which the basic idea is that, there's a sweet spot of knowledge and chutzpah that allows somebody to feel confident innovating. And I wonder to what extent, right, goes beyond Judaism and sort of connects to what you've experienced elsewhere. But the idea that we're playing with is that if you don't have enough knowledge, then you feel intimidated, or you don't feel like you have anything creative to add. But often if you have too much knowledge, you start to feel like, this has been around for so long. Who am I to make changes to it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering how, studying in the Wexner Heritage Program, which you mentioned, which is for our listeners just a program for Jewish lay leaders to learn more and to study Jewish texts and Jewish history and other subjects. How does sort of that education, and how do other ways in which somebody might educate themselves, how do they help, and how do they potentially get in the way of the openness and the total sort of sense of chutzpah that's needed for being able to do something truly creative?
I think always that being educated is very empowering. And for me, I really valued the experience that I had in Wexner. But I really found myself appreciating the history and learning the education a lot more than I thought I would. And I think you're right. I think it has empowered me to feel like I can make more creative decisions in how we observe Judaism in our own life, because they're all still grounded in history and fact and knowledge. I do have to say that I'm lucky to live in New York City, where when I walk down the street, I see more Hebrew than English. Like I like to tell people that I made Aliyah to the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So I feel like I'm very lucky to live in a world where Jewish identity is kind of in the air around us. 2 of the shows that just won Best Show on Broadway have Jewish and Israeli themes to them. I mean, I live in a world where history and education are always within reach and within the climate. Probably people who live in communities that are not like that have to work a lot harder to get that education and to be part of a community. So that's something that I feel really lucky to have built in naturally.
Randi, on that score, let me ask you a little bit about Hello Mazel, because I know that you were involved in that from the beginning. And we've talked with Yoav and Noah from the kitchen about Hello Mazel. And I'm interested, from your perspective, how does that connect with other, again, met and unmet needs that as you think about Jewish people today?
First of all, I'm a huge fan of everything that's happening over at the kitchen. I think Noah is a national treasure. I mean, I think it's really cool to be thinking about, when I think about who's innovating and disrupting in Judaism, that's who I think about. Also, a lot of the folks that are doing storytelling in Brooklyn and here. And that was really what drew me to the kitchen in the first place, seeing everything that they were doing with the Haggadah and Shabbat and kind of redefining what it means to feel like part of a synagogue and a community and holidays. And I think Hello Mazel, it really stemmed out of that gap that we were talking about in the beginning of this conversation. What do we do for people between their bar mitzvah and having kids? How do we communicate with them? How do we make Judaism kind of fun and appeal to this, millennial, artisanal kind of hipster vibe that people are into? We had a lot of fun curating the boxes. I think, we also learned a lot about what people want and don't want. But I think, there needs to be 100 ideas out there like Hello Mazel in order to reach 20-somethings. Just sending a box isn't going to work. We need to partner with a lot of organizations that are thinking of this in creative ways.
I want to go into your work that doesn't directly have to do with Judaism, because I have an instinct that we will be very much inspired by it and that it's actually extremely relevant. And so I was wondering if you could just share with us a little bit how you have gone about thinking and how you've gone about doing to meet the mission that you stated earlier, which I'm not going to get quite right because I wasn't fully taking notes, but to put tech savvy girls in the center of the tech world. What was it exactly?
You almost, good job. It was putting smart tech savvy women and girls at the center of pop culture. And I guess that's a pretty important distinction from tech, because right now, there's a lot of people that are trying to solve this issue of how to get more women and diversity into tech. But a lot of it are trying to do it from inside the tech community. There's, all of these girls who code programs and high school and college programs. All of my research has shown that if you do not get girls excited about tech by the time they're 9 or 10 years old, you've lost them. They're opting out because of maybe messages they're seeing on television and pop culture, of kind of sociological messages that they're getting around what girls are good at and not good at. And so I never, ever set out to be in children's content, but like any entrepreneur, you look at the data that you're getting and you think about the problem you're solving. And so after continually seeing all of that data, I decided to focus on preschool and early elementary. I have a show that's on television right now. We actually just won a big award in Canada yesterday, which is exciting. It's called Dot, and it's about, thank you, Dot. It's about a super tech savvy little girl. She's 8 years old, and she flies drones and builds robots and does all of these cool tech things, but she's also very much a girl. She wears a pink sparkly dress. She's not trying to be a boy. And we have tons of other content we're putting out. We're opening a pop-up restaurant this summer. That's, the most tech-savvy ice cream shop in the world. And that's kind of centered around a girl character. So we're trying to experiment and be everywhere that young girls are, because I think once we can get them to opt in, there's so many great programs out there for girls to learn technical skills. We just have to get them to opt in.
I'm really fascinated by this, and you've hinted in a couple different ways at an issue that I think is really crucial that I'd love to highlight, which is, in short, representation. I mean, you spoke about how there are Broadway plays, and we can almost take for granted at this point that there's sort of a Jewish public-facing presence in Broadway shows. We can take that for granted on TV. I think you're totally like 100% spot on that a key way to get any segment of society to be more interested in a particular element of society is to put a person in a big ticket public facing TV program or play or whatever, and then have them do it. And so I guess, and I even think about how, as somebody in an interfaith relationship, I get like my heart pounding in a positive way when I see positive portrayals of Jewish intermarriage in shows like New Girl on TV, and like I'm curious to hear more about what's really happening when a 7-year-old girl sees a show that powerfully portrays a girl or a woman in tech, that's then sort of causing them to go and possibly consider a life where they would do something like that.
When we were working on DOT, I looked at all of the preschool shows that exist out there. I mean, there are tons of shows that have to do with science and space and math, like great shows, and every single one of them has a male lead character. There are essentially no preschool shows that deal with those subjects that have a girl at the forefront. And I can tell you, I mean, my 5-year-old son came home from school and told me that Legos are for boys. So somewhere between age 0 and 5, I highly doubt that any parents in this modern world today are saying that to their kids, you know, Legos are only for boys, because they're not. They're plastic blocks. They're not, you know, for any gender. But somewhere between age 0 and 5, kids are learning from pop culture and other children around them that some things are for girls and some things are for boys. And so I can at least tell you that seeing a girl like Dot on TV arms girls with a different perspective, a different viewpoint, and says like, no, actually, sorry, these things are for girls. Like I saw Dot do them.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting because I think that we also, right, we didn't really we didn't intentionally get into media, right? I mean, that we've sort of had a similar experience where we started this podcast in part as a research project for a book, and then realized that people were much more relating to this sort of open-ended conversation that's available through a podcast than they probably would with a more sort of closed argument style of a book. And so now it's sort of like following that lead. So I think what we're learning, at least in terms of connecting with adults, is that having these kind of open conversations is very powerful and inviting. But I think that there's something in what you're talking about that we haven't yet really explored, in part because it's sort of overwhelming to think about how we would do it. But it's the storytelling dimension of it. It's the sense of if I can sort of tell a story in which a person like me did something like that, then somehow I can actually imagine that I might actually do that.
Absolutely. I mean, take a look at Hamilton and what that did for a resurgence in interest in American history. People couldn't name the founding fathers or talk about any of, the works that they wrote. And all of a sudden, you see this incredible interest in American history in young children in high schools because of this musical. I'm going to hear quiz show time. Do you guys know what the #1 musical performed in high schools around the country is? It is Fiddler on the Roof.
I swear I was going to guess it. I swear I was going to guess it.
And so, and I'm not just talking about high schools on the coast where there are a lot of Jews. Like, I'm talking about Alabama. I'm talking about Nebraska. Like, it is the #1 musical that is performed in high schools. And so, talk about how art and pop culture can be an incredibly influential way of educating people and bringing awareness and empathy and a message is, it's pretty incredible.
But so I think the question, right, like that I sort of want to think through is, what would a Fiddler on the Roof for today need to do, right? I sort of sometimes think about your typical Silicon Valley, tech person who is not really particularly interested in Judaism as they understand what it is based on how they grew up, and sort of thinking about the conversation where I would say to them, yeah, I totally agree, right? The way that you experienced it growing up didn't work for you and probably didn't work for most people. And yet you've devoted your professional life to the idea that when something's not working, I try to fix it, right? And I believe that these tools that we have now enable us to remix and to reimagine and to disrupt these old ways that aren't working. And I had an amazing conversation years ago with Ruth Calderon, who was the founder of a secular yeshiva in Israel called Alma. And it was a secular yeshiva that particularly focused on artists. And I asked her why she was focusing particularly on artists. And she said, two things. One is that artists, like, you just have to teach them stuff and they'll crunch it up. You don't have to teach them to be disruptive. And the other piece was that artists are highly influential. And the question is kind of like, if artists were trying to sort of create art that carried the message for folks in Silicon Valley who are so creative and so imaginative to see this story, to see this art, and to say, that means that I could, in my private life, right, switch the way that we do Shabbat or create something like Hello Mazel. What would those stories need to be like, and how can we sort of learn to tell those stories?
Oh my gosh, see, now you're talking about art and theater, and now you're like really in my excitable wheelhouse here. First of all, I love Fiddler on the Roof. It's one of my favorite shows. I also think it's incredibly outdated. A lot of the messages are very sexist and, not at all what Jewish life is like now that we are not, in the shtetl anymore. So I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be kind of a new resurgence of art. When we talk about the tech folks, the great entrepreneurs out there, they don't accept the status quo. They think that everything is right for disruption in our lives. And you're right. Most of us grew up in a world where we were either, kind of required to go to Sunday school or to sit through high holy day services. And, that's not fun. You don't have good memories of that. The tech folks love the tech folks. They are not at all thinking about art and content. All they think about in Silicon Valley is how to build the biggest platform possible. They think, okay, how do we build something that 1 billion people use? Like, they don't care what those people put on it. They just want to build giant platforms. And then, come over here to New York City, and we're so snobby about our art here that we think people are going to fly to New York just to see our art. And we don't think about distributing it at all. And I think the real answer, whether you're talking about Judaism or any other subject, is playing somewhere in the middle of those two. You need to create art and content that's so good that it, inspires people. But you also have to have those incredible distribution platforms, because art on its own, it isn't going to change the world if no one sees it.
What gets me jazzed, and what I think is interesting about the idea of a new version of Fiddler on the Roof, is I feel like we've actually gotten to the point where we have so much public-facing Judaism in television and movies, but it's all what I would consider a little bit old school. You have this problem where, until the show Transparent, as far as I know, there was no prominent female rabbi in a television show or movie that I know about. Just old man after old man after old man. You've got the issue that pop culture on Judaism tends to lag behind the reality of Judaism's racial diversity, which continues to grow more and more diverse. How can we, since you're doing this work in the realm of women and girls, do you have any strategies for how we can not only sort of center some cool forms of Judaism in pop culture, but make sure that they're really kinds of Judaism that will be a plausibility structure for people to go and make something new, and not just, oh yeah, that's like the Yom Kippur service I hated when I was 6. That's now on a TV show.
I'd love nothing more than in 20 years to see there's a new Fiddler on the Roof that's playing in high schools all around America. I think, I think that art and pop culture are the number one way to move the needle and make a difference in anything. But I definitely think that focusing more on kind of describing modern Jewish life in fun mass market art is one of the best things we could be doing.
In a sense, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're suggesting, right, that the what's available to us and what's going to continue to be more and more available to us from what's going on in Silicon Valley are large platforms. What we really need is something that's going to focus deeply and make sure that we create outstanding content. And then we need some group of people who will really know how to bridge that amazing content that's developed and the distribution platforms that are out there.
When you think about the great renaissance in like Jewish thought and philosophy and literature, like we are very poised to have another one of those right now with all of the great distribution channels that we have. So how do we kind of make a collective of all the great thinkers and writers and artists that we have and, focus them? I recently just learned that like most of the great Christmas songs were written by Jewish songwriters. I don't know if that's something that you guys knew, but like almost every good Christmas song that's out there was written by a Jew. Like, how do we channel that energy into something that's going to be telling some of our own stories?
The question is sort of like, how is that great art, that great content going to be created, right? Because it feels like, and I'm also wondering if there are things that you've discovered or learned in the process of working on all this over time that you could sort of bring to us that we might not be thinking of, because it feels to me like great content will be developed largely in sort of one of two ways. One is that there's some intense person, a genius, right, or some small group of working intensely on developing this content in a very intense and deep way. And then the question becomes to me, how do those people make a living, right? Especially where they're really working to develop something really, really deep and great, and it can't be distributed right away. And actually, we've talked about this. One of the problems that we've seen in the Jewish world today is a lot of times, as soon as somebody has like a decent idea that's a little exciting, there's a pressure to bring it to scale very quickly. And from my perspective, it tends to dissipate like you're saying, the product creation or the content creation part, because all of a sudden they're all working on distribution. They're all excited that their thing went viral, but really it's actually quite thin, and it had the potential to thicken up. But there was no way to sort of figure out the way to keep that group funded to actually just work on content for a while until they really come up with something. And then the other potentiality is, it's a distributed process that's kind of, everybody's doing a little thing. Like I was actually so inspired. I still am so inspired by your idea of Shabbat. Like I think that I'm going to do that in my family because I think that it's one thing, right? It's one little thing. And then the question becomes not necessarily where I went with it was to ask you, what else have you invented, but it's actually, okay, well, we're going to take that one thing from Randi, and we're going to take that one thing from Lex, and that one thing from, and so how do we create that sort of distributed, networked, cottage industry of content innovation? And potentially that's what the digital age allows in a way that wasn't really fully available to us before. I mean, those are the two possibilities. I'm curious if you see a third, and if not, sort of what do we need to do, whether the first is possible. How could we really make that, that Yavne, that place where rabbinic Judaism was developed in the early years after the destruction of the temple. It was sort of an elite, a bunch of people got together. The rest of the people weren't really participating in what they were doing, but somehow, they were able to sustain themselves for a while until they invented a new Judaism, versus, potentially what's available today, the sort of distributed networked approach.
These are like the $1 billion questions. So I'm excited. We're like solving the future of Judaism here.
Right.
I mean, I wonder, like, even what a Wexner type program would be that would get creative folks together and almost kind of be like, here's a year or 2 years of your life that like you can dedicate fully to creating like your art and your content. Maybe every synagogue in America could have an artist in residence in addition to like a rabbi and a cantor. I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways to start thinking creatively about how to generate more artistic content. And, our big issue right now is that we live in a world where there's so much noise and so much content that how do we, create our own canon? Like how is our generation going to be remembered of our Jewish stories, and how do we create our own canon of art and literature and work that's going to really influence the next generations to come of how they view Judaism and how they view our contribution to it.
In sort of arcing toward our conclusion, I actually want to sort of go back a little bit to where we started, because I think it's more clear at this stage, which is that as we've been talking about the potential to remake Judaism in various ways and to actually rebuild a story structure that might create the potential for people to feel like they're empowered to be part of that remaking. I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on what it is that people today in this digital age or the beginning of the digital age or whatever, what as you see it are sort of the driving human needs that are out there in our day that are not really being met by anything that's out there currently, and where maybe Judaism or some reimagined Judaism could sort of help people live the kind of lives that they're trying to lead but failing.
I think, first of all, going back to this notion of rest and the Sabbath and enjoying our families, I think we live in a world where the pace is so go, frenetic that, how lucky are we to be part of a culture that values taking a day of rest to just love and appreciate the things around you. I think that's something that more of us, whether, we're creating our own interpretation of that, can take into account. And I also think there's, a huge need for community. We're living in lives that are more and more distant from our families and friends. We move jobs more, we move locations more, we're less committed or kind of married to anything than ever before. And so how do you create, a sense of a Jewish community that travels with you as you go through this new world and isn't just tied to belonging to one synagogue or one physical location? So I think, there's a lot of big challenges here, but it's also exciting because we've always been very resilient as a people. I'm excited about these challenges. I think there are really smart, wonderful people who are thinking through them. And I think the next 5 to 10 years can potentially be very transformative.
In conclusion, is there anything that you really want to talk about that we haven't asked you about?
I guess the only story that I'd love to share for anyone who hasn't read my book is the story of singing for Shimon Peres in Davos, because for me, that encapsulated a lot of the personal conflicts that I've had with my own Jewish identity. It's embodied a lot. I was invited to the World Economic Forum several years ago as a representative of Facebook. And the World Economic Forum, it's an incredible event in Davos, Switzerland, where presidents from around the world, Nobel Prize winners, basically just the most incredible thinkers and leaders from around the world go. I still don't know how I got in that room, but was very lucky. And I got invited to the Shabbat dinner that they host there, which is pretty much like every prominent Jew on the planet. Elie Wiesel was there, Shimon Peres, Bibi. There were, I think, 8 Nobel Prize winners in the room. And about 5 minutes before the dinner started, someone came up to me and said, "Hey, Randi, usually Elie Wiesel does an opening song, but he doesn't feel like doing it tonight. And someone told us that you studied to be an opera singer. Will you sing?" With about 5 minutes of notice, I pulled up the lyrics of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav on my BlackBerry, because I carried a BlackBerry at the time. And I kind of got up and sang Yerushalayim Shel Zahav in front of Shimon Peres and Bibi in this room of people. And on one hand, it was probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life. To stand up there as a young Jewish woman singing about Israel to the people who made Israel possible was just like a mind-blowing, incredible experience. On the other hand, I saw almost every phone in the room go up to record it. And by a few hours later, it was a front page headline on all of these Israeli newspapers that I had sang. And I had a lot of mentors who I respected in Silicon Valley telling me that I should probably lose my job for that, because someone representing a company should not take such a personal political stand. And that was really difficult for me, because that was my first introduction to the fact that you don't get a separate professional and private identity anymore. We live in a world of smartphones and Google, and where, I had just taken a very public stand, whether I had thought about it that way or not. And the next year, when they invited me back to sing again, I declined the honor, which broke my heart. I've had a lot of struggles over the years with how a Jewish identity intersperses in and out with a professional identity, what it means when you have a voice that's influential and how you use it. And to some extent on social media, we all have a voice that's influential. So I think that was a real experience in my life, that really changed a lot of my perspectives on a lot of things.
Well, and I want to say two things about that story. Number one, I listened to your book, Complicated, actually, and you actually sang the song on the audiobook. So that was an extremely wonderful surprise. And I think that our listeners might enjoy that. And the other thing, though, more seriously, is that both in this conversation and in that book, I think that one of the things that you're role modeling so amazingly is the willingness to struggle in public. And I think that if anything, what we're trying to do on this show is to say that if nothing else, the history of Judaism, at least over the last 2,000 years, has been one of struggling to figure it out and struggle. And actually the word Israel means struggle. So even if we are only bringing that back into the Jewish conversation, I think that's actually a huge contribution. And I really want to thank you for what you wrote in the book and for this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think, it's important for all of us anywhere to talk about our failures. I think it's easy for people to get on a podcast or on a stage or somewhere and just talk about like all the things they've done right. But we don't, as humans, really learn from what we did right.
Absolutely. What a great note to end on. And I'm reminded actually of a poem by Yehuda Amichai that's titled From the Place Where We Are Right. And it begins with, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow. And I think that what you just said is a really great reminder of that important sentiment. And I just want to say thanks again for coming on and joining us for a great episode.
Thank you guys for creating this wonderful platform to bring up a really thoughtful conversation.
We hope that you've enjoyed this episode featuring guest Randi Zuckerberg, and we want to close out the episode in the same way we always do by encouraging all of you out there to be in touch with us. And there are a few ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can always hit up our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And last but not least, you can always send us a note via email at dan@nextjewishfuture.org or lex@nextjewishfuture.org. The last plug we like to make is that you can always support us financially with a monetary donation, either a one-time gift or a monthly recurring donation. And you can do that at www.JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.